Guys, good morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for starting your Thursday with us. We are going to begin our show in Switzerland, where President Trump is walking back his threat of additional tariffs on European allies if Greenland is not sold to the U.S. by February 1st. Well, the president backed down following a meeting with NATO's Secretary General yesterday on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos. He said they had formed the framework of a future deal.
The president sparked a diplomatic firestorm with European allies over his desire to acquire the Arctic island, which is a territory of Denmark. Both Greenland and Denmark have insisted it's not for sale, a position strongly backed by Europe. During his speech earlier in the day, the president doubled down on his wish to buy the territory, which he repeatedly confused with Iceland. He also described Greenland as a piece of ice and criticized longstanding allies for opposing him. Speaking to CNBC last night, the president gave few details about what this deal actually involved.
We have a concept of a deal. I think it's going to be a very good deal for the United States, also for them. And we're going to work together on something having to do with the Arctic as a whole, but also Greenland, and it has to do with the security. It's a little bit complex, but we'll explain it down the line. But the Secretary General of NATO and I and some other people were talking, and it's the kind of a deal that I wanted to be able to make.
In a few moments, we're going to hear from Robert English. He's the director of the USC School of International Relations. First, let's get to NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez and NBC's Ellison Barber, who joins us from Greenland. Gabe, let's start with you. What more can you tell us about this potential deal over Greenland? Do we know if it involves ceding any territory to the U.S.?
Well, Joe and Savannah, good morning. A lot of questions about this deal at this point. The president not providing any details when pressed on it yesterday, as you just heard. But he did say, he told reporters that this would be, quote, a long-term deal. Now, we are learning from our sources, two former U.S. officials as well as some congressional official, that the president walked into Davos wanting to negotiate here, despite his escalating rhetoric over the past several days about acquiring Greenland. Now, the New York Times is also reporting, citing three officials familiar with the talks, that in a separate meeting, NATO officials discussed a compromise in which Denmark would give the U.S. sovereignty over small pockets of Greenland where the U.S. could build military bases. Now, an existing agreement dating back decades already allows the U.S. to expand its military presence in Greenland. But at this point, Joe and Savannah, a lot of unanswered questions about the exact details of this framework.
Ellison, let's bring you in here again, joining us from Greenland. How are officials in Denmark and there in Greenland reacting to this potential deal, potential framework?
So we haven't heard from Greenland's prime minister just yet. We do expect to hear from him at some point later today, but we are getting a statement from the prime minister of Denmark saying this in part. I can read some of it to you here. So she says, in essence, that security in the Arctic is and has been a matter for all of NATO. She says that the Kingdom of Denmark has long worked for NATO to increase engagement in the Arctic. And she went on to say this, quote, we can negotiate on everything, political, security, investments, economy, but we cannot negotiate on our sovereignty. She said, I have been informed that this has not been the case either. And she said, and of course, only Denmark and Greenland themselves can make decisions on issues concerning Denmark and Greenland. In terms of just the general sense here, which I know we can talk a little more about, a lot of people are saying we need to see more details of this, because this shift, this announcement from President Trump last night, it was quite a shock here in Greenland. Savannah, Joe?
We know that people in Greenland were also worried, Ellison, just about the president potentially using military force to take over the island. The president did seem to rule that out in his speech yesterday, but as we mentioned, he repeatedly described Greenland as a piece of ice. He confused it with Iceland. Just in general, how are folks there reacting to his speech?
I mean, people were flabbergasted. You mentioned that comment where he described it as a piece of ice, a block of ice. That did not go over well. One woman telling us we are not a block of ice. We are human beings. And at the time, she said, and this was before he made that announcement about this framework of a deal with NATO, she said, we have a lot of people here, grandparents, children who are afraid right now of what the U.S. might do. Let you listen to some of what we have heard in terms of what was said at Davos and also some of the initial reaction we got here in Greenland after President Trump announced this framework of a deal with NATO. Listen.
I think it's a little bit a loss of respect that he just called Greenland a piece of ice. It's more than a piece of ice.
I think it's madness. If they want to be Americans, it's not a decision for NATO to do, or for Denmark for that sake.
And in terms of that Davos speech, another thing that did not go over well here in Greenland was President Trump's suggestion, or claim rather, that after World War II, the United States gave Greenland back to Denmark. The United States never owned Greenland. There was a time during World War II where Nazi Germany had invaded Denmark, and there was an agreement between the United States and Denmark's then ambassador to the United States to militarily defend Greenland from Nazi Germany. But the U.S. never owned Greenland. In fact, they'd made an offer after the war to buy Greenland from Denmark. Denmark said no. Then there was a defense agreement related to Greenland in 1951, where in Article 2 of that agreement, the United States recognized Denmark's sovereignty here. Joe, Savannah.
Gabe, earlier this morning, we mentioned this a moment ago. Another thing we want to ask you about, the president participated in a signing ceremony. This is for his board of peace. So it's being billed as this international body that can resolve these global conflicts. But others are saying it could undermine the United Nations. Tell us about what this board is and what we heard from the president.
Yeah, that's right, Savannah. This has become pretty controversial. The Board of Peace, we first heard about it when President Trump was talking about it in the context of the reconstruction of Gaza. Now, the idea behind it seems to be much larger, much broader in scope. And Trump administration officials say that they've invited around 50 countries to be a part of it, and that so far more than 24 have agreed to be a part of it. Now, among those invited includes a host of authoritarian leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. And now, as you mentioned, several European allies, including the UK, are declining to participate at this point, citing concerns about that it could undermine the United Nations, Savannah.
All right, Gabe and Ellison covering a lot of territory for us this morning. Thank you both.
Let's bring in Robert English now for some analysis on this latest twist in the Greenland saga. Robert, good morning. Thanks for joining us again. So we still don't know exactly, of course, details are not there yet, this so-called framework of a deal on Greenland. We don't know what it involves. But what do you think ultimately made the president kind of back off a little bit when it came to those tariffs, when it came to saying, you know, I might use military force, ruling that out now? What do you think made him reevaluate this?
Yeah, I don't think he kind of backed off. He completely backed down. And, you know, the Europeans are being generous, allowing him a consolation prize, holding this Board of Peace ceremony at Davos and talking about a framework of a deal over the Arctic. But Trump conceded. Everyone understands that Trump lost, that he backed down. And he did so because the Europeans finally stood up for themselves. And instead of seeking to conciliate or make side deals, they stood united. They threatened their own counter tariffs. They aimed them at red states. They had the trade bazooka ready to go. And Trump got scared, right? The bond markets, the stock market started to tank, and he backed down. So we need to be clear exactly on who won and who lost and how much this has weakened America, not just in terms of Trump's bargaining power and his ability to threaten this way in the future, but also in terms of America's stature and prestige in the world. And that will be the most damaging long-run casualty of this reckless gambit of President Trump's.
Yeah, I want to ask you more about that. I mean, this whole saga, just truly, what kind of damage is it doing to our relationship with our European allies?
A lot of damage. You know, I would say over the past year of the second Trump administration, they've gone from shock, then dismay, and now it's really just open disgust, right? Trump stood there for an hour and harangued the leaders of the world with insults, with threats, with grievances and falsehoods, as if he were addressing a MAGA rally at home. And as a Europe watcher, I have to tell you, the private and even now public expressions of disgust and dismay are really devastating. And I think America has essentially ceded the leadership of the free world, at least for the moment, to Mark Carney, right, the Canadian leader. And what he said was important, that going forward, they will have to seek to work around America, not with America. They will have to reduce their ties and their dependency on America because it can't be trusted not to bully them. And therefore, Canada and Europe are both building up their ties with Latin America, with China, to work around us more than with us.
Robert, with that in mind, and the damage that you do think it's done to these relationships, as we look to the future, what does this mean for President Trump's standing in the world, but also as we sort of think of the world order that's generally been in place since the end of World War II, with the U.S. leading that? What does this do to that?
It's hard to say how lasting the damage will be. For the moment, it seems like a really tectonic shift, and it's hard to imagine America regaining the trust and confidence that existed between us and our allies, for the entire post-war period in any short order. It'll take a new administration. It'll take decades of work to reestablish that. So Trump's personal prestige has taken a big hit, and America's as well. It's hard to predict the details, but I think at least a decade of repair before we get back anywhere near the level of trust we've enjoyed in preceding decades.
Robert English, thank you very much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Get ready, a massive winter snowstorm is coming together, and it has the potential to impact more than half of the U.S. this weekend. The storm, which is packing heavy snow and damaging ice, could create the worst conditions so far this winter.
Yeah, get this. He said about half the country, that's more than 120 million people under these winter alerts. It stretches from the southwest all the way up into the northeast. Meanwhile, tens of millions will also be under cold alerts. All these numbers are only expected to climb also. The storm is set to begin tomorrow and last through the weekend as it slowly makes its way across the country. Now, states of emergency have actually already been declared by officials in several states, including the Carolinas and Texas.
That's right, Texas. NBC News correspondent Ryan Chandler is there in Dallas. That tells you just how widespread this thing is. Ryan, several regions of the country, snow, ice, or a mix of both of those. What are the biggest concerns for those who are in the storm's path this weekend?
Well, Joe, Savannah, good morning. I think the biggest concerns at this point for life safety are on the highways and the power lines. States of emergency declared here in Texas as well as Georgia and the Carolinas. It's an all-hands-on-deck approach to prep the roads. TxDOT here is out with brine trucks trying to make them as safe as possible, but officials here in Dallas are warning that it's just not going to be safe to get out on the roads for the next few days. Power lines are also a big issue. Localized power outages could cause people to lose heat, which is a big concern. Texas is opening warming centers to make sure that everybody has a safe place to go if that does happen. But the message to stay safe from officials right now is just to stay home, get out now, and prep while you can so that you don't have to be on the roads once this freeze hits, Joe.
Ryan, as Joe mentioned, I mean, the fact that you're reporting on this from Texas says enough right there. And many people in that state, I'm sure, remember the massive winter storm that hit in 2021. I mean, really just tragic. It was blamed for nearly 250 deaths because of all these ripple effects, leaving millions without power across the state when it was so cold. How are officials bracing for this one? Are they more prepared now?
They say they are, and you're right. Texans are understandably very anxious every time we see the forecast turn this way. But ERCOT told us yesterday, that's the state power grid operator, they say they are stronger than they were 5 years ago. The state has really taken pains to improve their electrical grid since then to make sure that that never happens again. They've made their infrastructure more resilient to all kinds of weather, both heat and cold. They've invested more than $10 billion to bring more energy online onto the grid and create backup forms of power. So we don't expect to see some statewide grid failure like we saw in 2021, but people still could lose power because of freezing rain bringing down trees and power lines. But that's a local outage. It's different than an ERCOT issue.
And we see folks buying shovels there and buying some salt for the ice. Just for everyday folks, what's the best advice for how to prepare, especially if you're in a place like Dallas that just isn't used to getting much ice and snow?
Yeah, look, I think everybody needs to take this storm seriously, but the tips to stay safe are simple. Just stay home. Get out now to get all the supplies you need to stay warm, and make sure that you don't need to get out on the roads. Just wait it out until the ice thaws. Yes.
All right. Ryan Chandler in Dallas. Thank you so much.
Let's get you some forecast details so you can prepare for that bitter incoming winter blast with a check at your Morning News Now weather. We have meteorologist David Bigger with us this morning. David, good morning.
Good morning. As we go through the next couple of days, we're looking at a massive, disruptive, and damaging winter storm that will extend from the southern plains into the northeast. It's almost 2,000 miles long. Now, the storm is going to start up tomorrow, bringing snow and ice by the afternoon hours and dangerous travel after sunset. It will continue to expand off toward the east as we get into Saturday, including now a crippling ice storm that will lead to impossible travel conditions and the possibility of prolonged power outages as lines start to come down in some of the accumulating ice. And we're not done there. As we head into Sunday, snow and ice is going to continue with the potential for heavy snowfall across portions of the northeast. So here's what we're looking at snowfall-wise across the area. First of all, you can see just how big this looks across the entire country. But heading into the northeast, this is where we're seeing some of the heaviest snowfall from the Ohio Valley up into the northeast. And that purple coloring, that's as much as a foot of snow or even more in a few spots. And on top of that, we're also looking at accumulating ice through a good portion of the south. Just imagine how many airports are sitting in this. That's going to make for a lot of travel headaches and some very dangerous roadways because of the ice accumulation. And again, the potential for prolonged power outages since so many lines and so many trees may potentially start to lose branches here with the accumulating ice. Now, that's not the only thing we're talking about. We're also talking about some very cold air for today. Frigid Arctic air is going to be blowing into the northern plains. We're looking at potentially wind chills down as low as 40 to 50 degrees below. So on the actual thermometer itself, you might see -1 in Bismarck for today, about 10 degrees in Minneapolis. Tomorrow, even colder as that air continues to spill in. So now we're looking at about a degree below zero in Chicago, St. Louis about 17 degrees, and it's going to stay cold for a couple of days. So here's your 3-day forecast where you can see that for Kansas City, for example, we're only looking at single digits for Saturday, Sunday about 14 degrees, and by Monday only a little bit warmer at 19 degrees. That's a look at the forecast. Back to you.
All right, David, thank you so much.
We are learning new information this morning about a significant and up until now secret policy change for ICE officers during immigration operations.
Yeah, this is from an internal ICE memo, and it was dated May 12th of last year. It shows that ICE officers and agents were told they could forcibly enter homes of people subject to deportations without judicial warrants. The document, which appears to be from the acting ICE director, Todd Lyons, was shared with Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal by 2 whistleblowers.
NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now with more on this. Julia, good morning. Can you just walk us through the details of this memo and what it advises ICE officers to do during these immigration operations?
Well, basically, it's saying that if they need access to someone's private residence, like their home, that they are able to go in without a warrant. Now, that is opposite how ICE is trained. We were able to go to their training and even talk to the professors who were teaching immigration law classes who said they do need a warrant before they go into someone's home. Now, the times that I've seen warrants be signed, a magistrate judge will sign it in the case where ICE is targeting an individual. They believe they have the evidence they were in the country illegally. They often have evidence that they've committed some other crime besides being in the country illegally. In other words, it's because ICE has information that this person has broken the law, not just because they suspect there may be someone illegal in the house. That's the big difference here. ICE is pushing back on this memo, saying that it is still their policy, that they do need warrants before going in. But clearly, this whistleblower report points to another policy, and it's unclear exactly what guidelines current ICE officers have been given to follow. Most of the breaches, I will say, of that policy appear to be happening around cars, which some people may say has a different understanding. You might have a different understanding of privacy based on the Fourth Amendment and the Constitution in your home than you would in your car. So it's an ongoing debate. But clearly, there has been a policy push per this memo to tell officers that they can go into homes regardless of whether or not they've done the research and had the permission from a judge.
Julia, you just mentioned the Fourth Amendment. That's against unreasonable search and seizure. And you're kind of touching on this, but I guess just very bluntly, like, is this legal? And also tell us how DHS is responding to this memo having been made public.
Well, yeah, they're saying that this is not their policy, but it's hard, you know, obviously, given the paper that everyone is looking at. And again, we don't know how many people were told to follow this versus another. But the Fourth Amendment does prevent the U.S. people in the United States, not just U.S. citizens, people living here, from unreasonable search and seizure. And that could mean someone searching your residence or seizing things that's unreasonable. And the way we define reasonable is whether or not a judge has signed off on giving law enforcement the power to go and search and seize. And to get a judge to agree to that, an ICE officer would have to go before a judge and give the evidence of why they thought this was a necessary use of law enforcement. And so now we're entering into a new phase if these ICE officers are able to make those decisions on the fly without having to show that evidence to a judge.
Julia, we know that Vice President J.D. Vance is expected to visit Minneapolis today. That's where protesters have been clashing with ICE officers for a few weeks over these immigration operations. The Pentagon has also put troops on standby with orders to prepare to deploy to Minnesota. Just where do things stand with the federal response to all this?
That's right. 2 Department of Defense officials told my colleague Courtney Kuby that there are now over 1,500 military troops now active duty ready to go in to Minneapolis if called. Now, what the president would have to do in order to get those troops to arrive would be to invoke the Insurrection Act. It's something that he has toyed with doing. We're often just trying to hear every word coming out from the White House, from Trump, from Stephen Miller, from Caroline Leavitt. Caroline Leavitt has said he has the power to do this. The last time the Insurrection Act was invoked was 1992 during the Rodney King riots that ended up with 12,000 arrests. There have been far fewer than that in the Minneapolis arrest. And we also know that only one person has died in Minneapolis during all this. That would be Renee Nicole Good at the hands of ICE officers, unlike Rodney King, where hundreds died during those riots. And so the president, to invoke the Insurrection Act, may be going a bit further than president has allowed in the past. But J.D. Vance is on the ground. This follows Attorney General Pam Bondi, who was recently in Minneapolis. It's certainly an area this White House is going to continue to talk about and continue to really pressure, because they want local law enforcement there to cooperate with them during their ICE operations. And they're basically accusing the city and the governor at this point of being complicit in breaking immigration law. And so that is a reason why they think they may need to invoke the Insurrection Act to quell protesters.
All right. Julia, thank you so much.
Well, a jury in Texas returned a not guilty verdict in the trial of a police officer who was charged with failing to act to stop the Uvalde school shooting. Former police officer Adrian Gonzalez was cleared of dozens of charges after being accused of not doing enough to help the children during the 2022 mass shooting at Robb Elementary School.
In each of the 29 counts, we, the jury, find the defendant, Adrian Gonzalez, not guilty.
Gonzalez was one of the first officers to arrive on scene of the shooting, which left 19 students and 2 teachers dead. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson has the details from the courthouse in Corpus Christi.
Yeah, former Uvalde Schools police officer Adrian Gonzalez has been found not guilty on 29 counts of child endangerment for the children who were killed, the 19 who were killed, and the 10 who survived the 2022 Robb Elementary School shooting. We saw, as that not guilty verdict was read, Adrian Gonzalez put his head down, appearing very emotional. We also saw many of the members of the families of the victims, some of them wiping tears, others appearing stoic as they heard that not guilty verdict. Now, over the course of the past 2 weeks, this trial has gone on where that jury heard testimony, harrowing testimony from survivors, testimony from law enforcement officers who were on the scene, among others. And ultimately, they had to make that decision today, with the state saying that Adrian Gonzalez did not act, that he was told the direction that the shooter was going in, that he heard the gunshots, and that he did not act and did not act quickly enough to do all that he could to prevent this from happening. But we also heard from the defense saying that Adrian Gonzalez did act. He ran to someone who he thought was the shooter. It turned out that that person was not the shooter. And they also say that he eventually did go into the school, which many other officers did not do. And clearly, the jury deciding that the verdict was going to be not guilty, they did not feel like he should be held criminally responsible in this case. So certainly a devastating outcome for the families, who had told me that while they were hopeful that they might get some sort of justice, they were not sure that they were going to get this guilty verdict. And of course, things did not go their way. But still, there is another case that is going to be brought, and that is, of course, with the former Uvalde Schools Police Chief Pete Arredondo, who is also set to go to trial on similar charges. Back to you.
All right, Priscilla, thank you so much. Well, NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris is here to help walk us through this verdict. Misty, good morning. Obviously, just such a tragedy, a heartbreak all around. But let's talk through kind of the legal process here in this 3-week-long trial. Prosecutors, they focus on a few things. The amount of time, of course, that it took for Officer Gonzalez to act, also whether or not he was following his training in what he did, and also testimony that alleged that these teachers really put themselves in harm's way to protect the children while officers did not. How did the defense persuade a jury that he was not guilty of any of these charges?
Yeah, so this is a really difficult case, but where the defense actually hung its hat was on those minutes when Gonzalez arrived to the scene. So this case, from the prosecutor's perspective, was that he failed to act, and he could have actually stopped the shooter from ever entering the building. And prosecutors say he had about 3.5 minutes to do so. The defense questioned that timeline, said it was more like 1 minute and 45 seconds. Why does this matter? Well, the defense said that he did not know where the shooter was at that time. It was a chaotic scene. And so he actually did follow his training, and he acted reasonably under the circumstances. They also pointed to the fact that there were many other law enforcement officers who were involved, and of those officers, he was one of the first to actually enter the school building. So there were other factors that the defense said prosecutors were really ignoring when it came to his actions during that day.
You mentioned many. There were about 370
Yes.
officers who responded in some form or fashion that day. Only 2 were charged in the end. How much do you think that factored into the decision? I mean, was part of the defense, hey, you're scapegoating this guy when there were so many others who responded?
It was. It was about, why is this person the only one sitting in the defense chair? And there was a Department of Justice investigation that was conducted, and it was like 600 pages long. And it said that there were failures of law enforcement at every level. And remember, this wasn't just local police. This was federal officers that responded. It took 77 minutes for them to enter that classroom. So there were so many failures with that, and with respect to training, that the defense focused on that as well.
Priscilla mentioned that the former Uvalde School Police Chief, Pete Arredondo, he will also face trial. That has not been scheduled yet. But tell us about the differences here, the difference in charges that he's facing, the difference in responsibility they maybe both had.
So it's the same child endangerment charges, although it's 10 charges as opposed to 29, but it is a different set of facts. So he was the chief, he was the commander on site, and the facts surrounding his charges relate to failures to enter the classroom once those officers were in the building. That's that 77-minute time frame that we've heard so much about, that he did not treat the situation as an active shooter. So that case is in a holding pattern right now, but we'll see when that trial comes.
All right, Misty Maris, thank you as always.
On Capitol Hill, lawmakers voted to hold the Clintons in contempt of Congress. In a bipartisan vote, the House Oversight Committee held both former President Bill Clinton and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in contempt for failing to comply with a subpoena to answer questions about its Epstein investigation. The vote now advances to the full House, and if it passes, the Clintons will be referred to the Justice Department, where federal prosecutors will decide whether to prosecute the former First Family. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, says the Clintons' apparent close relationship with Epstein warrants an in-person appearance. The Clintons, though, have been pushing back. Their lawyers call the subpoenas, quote, invalid. Well, the first set of Epstein files released last month did include several photos of Bill Clinton. The Clintons have not been accused of any wrongdoing related to Epstein. The former president said he cut ties with Epstein before Epstein was accused of having sex with a minor back in 2006.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or watch live on our YouTube channel.